You dropped the mag?
Hey, brassfacts here. Today, probably the review I've anticipated most thus far, something I put more time, effort, and thought into compared to any other review. Almost 3 years of trying to find one of these things, my Flux Raider review. Before getting started, disclaimer, I know, they're boring as shit, but they gotta be here. I received the chassis, the Flux Raider chassis, for free. The owner of the Flux Raider saw my TP9 video, was like, oh, that thing kinda sucks, and wanted to get my hands onto one of these, so he can kind of see the comparison and see how this does versus the TP9. We talked, and at some point it went from being me paying for it to receiving it for free. So here we are. Second disclaimer, I'm going to review the Flux Raider, the weapon. Not Flux Raider, just the chassis, the part that the company makes, but Flux Raider, the weapon that includes the slide and the trigger pack. Obviously, these are two different things, and Flux doesn't have any control over, say, the trigger or the slide, but from a consumer's point of view, you're going to be viewing this as a complete package, hence how I'm going to review the video. Okay, let's do it. The Flux Raider, the thing you keep seeing in GBRS, Travis Haley, and other famous internet drip videos. It's a chassis system like we've seen so many times before, where they try to take a pistol and make it worth a fuck. Except this time, it might actually be worth that aforementioned fuck. Let's get into it. You have something that matches the form factor of a I'm not British, VZ61 with modern accoutrements. You have standard P320 slide. I can't show you disassembly because YouTube sucks an entire nut. But you put a P320 slide on here, you put the trigger pack in, and you're already off to the races. Just make sure to throw an Optic on here. Some of the fancier slides might not work, so I'd be sure to check the website. The big party trick here is the brace deployment. Brace deployment system, which can be done one-handed for a righty, and requires, unfortunately, a second hand for a lefty. That will be a reoccurring theme with the usage of this weapon as a lefty. It also carries its own magazine supply on board with this forward magazine holder thingy, which is totally not a foregrip. No, it says right here, not a VFG, so we're good. The Flux Raider has traditional mag release here and here, but it also has the secondary thumb release system over here that releases both mags simultaneously, or just the forward mag with a half press. You know, with the totally not a VFG and a totally not a stock over here, which, by the way, both are labeled, this really reminds me of the nut kicker from Military Arms, the Military Arms channel, the NFA nut kicker. Kind of funny, but let's move on. You can see other attachment points for a sling here and a sling point here. It's worth noting, and this will come up later, the sling point here is mounted to the brace itself. You can attach a flashlight up front, standard pistol type, and then up here you can put an optic. This is a Picatinny mount. This is different from the original Flux Raider, which had a kind of pistol mount style. There are some neat other features in here where there is a Allen point here where you can put an Allen key, which matches most of the screws on board this thing, and then you also have a battery slot inside the brace over here. So when you see all this, you think, hey, that's pretty cool, I kind of want one. Or you see all this and ask the question, why the fuck would you brutalize a P320 like this? Well, the answer is simple, because fuck's sake. No, because I have an entire video up here where I discuss why PDW size weapons in pistol calibers are actually super useful and relevant to a modern citizen defensive posture, to the point where it might actually be more useful than, say, a rifle. Yes, I will die on this hill. Go up here, watch the video, probably watch it in 1.5x playback speed, and then report back here. Because if you don't understand my logic as to why something like this would make sense, well then this whole concept just doesn't make sense, and this video is pointless. So go watch that. How did this perform over the usage? Trying to leave opinions to the side. We have two fluxes, it actually is kind of a flex, in the group. One of them was the one I received, and the second one was actually purchased from a friend of mine that shoots with me very often. This one is configured with a full-length slide, and I put a Apex trigger upgrade near the end of the review. Most of the review was on the stock trigger. The second one is a C-slide, so it's slightly shorter, meant for, concealed carry, but now we shoved it on a chassis system, and this works quite well with a threaded barrel, so you can put a suppressor in, and yes, most pistol suppressors will fit within this gap. That one also has a charging handle mounted into the forward slide slot that we CNC'd and acts as a charging handle. This one specifically has 1400 rounds, and the C1, which became the focus at that 1400 round point because that one could take a suppressor, and I really wanted to shoot the suppressor. That one has over 2,000, probably just under 2,500 rounds on it. So all in all, between both of us, we have 4,000 rounds on the Flux system. Reliability was near flawless. I recall 2 to 3 malfunctions in total in the base configuration, and we were using some pretty poopy remanufactured ammo. At the end of the day, it's a SIG with SIG expensive-ass magazines, so it is expected that this is reliable. That's nothing out of the ordinary, but it's good to see the chassis doesn't fuck with the weapon's reliability. Moving on to suppressor usage, however, sadly, this is where the performance goes down the gutter, which is sad because really, this thing with a can is a goddamn vibe. We used an Omega 9K with a piston, we lubed it, we did all the stuff. The short of it is no. The long of it is we were closing in on 10 to 30% failure rate depending on the ammunition. We tried everything to make it work without modifying components, which is the next thing we're going to be doing. I suspect due to the brace, the recoil impulse shifts enough that the energy required to force it unlock and then cycle the weapon is not present, obviously. I assume this is the case because use this as a pistol one-handed style and let the gun recoil a little more. It goes to 100% reliabilities. When you brace it, it goes back down to piss poor reliability. On this page that I'll show on screen, you can see people that have tried to suppress a Flux Raider. Some of them have been very successful. Some of them have not been successful. Some of them have shot 20 rounds and said it's successful. See it for yourself. No matter how I slice it, you can say with a high degree of confidence it is very likely that your Flux Raider will not work 100% with a suppressor. We will be tinkering with ours to make it work, and a lot of people have reported once they start modifying things, it works. But for me personally, the Flux Raider is not compatible with a suppressor out of the box, statistically speaking. Controls. Controls are very good for a chassis system. Really good actually compared to even non-chassis systems. The big thing is the inclusion of a ambi safety that isn't half-assed. This is not the norm with chassis or even some PDWs, which I cannot understate how big of a deal this is. You need a safety on a weapon like this. And so often it's an afterthought, so major props. This is probably one of the biggest low-key features on this weapon. The inclusion of a safety. And a good safety at that. The only exception to these good controls is the inclusion of this guy right here. It makes this gun non-compatible with right-hand or left-handed users. When you put your hand or palm on the totally not a VFG zone, you will press this and very consistently drop mags into the dirt. I removed it with that Allen key included and then put a plastic 3D printed cutout here. No problems since. Both of these magazine releases work absolutely fine if you are non-crippled. But honestly, using them, in my opinion, it's like drinking White Claw at Oktoberfest. Come on, dude. You should be using this guy right here. Half press gives you one mag, double press gives you both. I'm holding it sideways so it's not dropping free right now, but when you're having it upright, this will fall out and then you can quickly insert this one. You've seen it on video. If you want to do a tack load, simply tilt the gun inboard, full press. It won't fall because it's sideways. Do the standard thing. And boom, you've done a tack reload with a mag retention. If you want, on a reload, you can drop the slide via this lever right here. However, it is worth noting that this lever is also what is responsible for moving the brace system. Typically, you'll have this braced. Depressing this will cause the brace to collapse and you will punch yourself in the face. I would not recommend using it in this fashion. Sometimes you may also run into issues where the 17 rounders are simply too flush fitting and you will miss a reload. You won't get it in all the way. As you can see, that is extremely flush fitting. It's just something you need to note and you need to really palm it in there. Otherwise, you won't get a consistent reload. All these issues are solved by using the unobtainium overpriced 21 rounder magazine. As mentioned, the brace system works quite well. If you use one-handed operations as a righty, it will come out like so. And if you are a lefty, you will have to use two-handed operations with the thumb, like so. How reliable is this deployment system? It depends what you define as reliable. There's two ways to look at it. If all you care about is the brace deploying at in some fashion and locking in, this is 100% reliable. There are multiple notches in here that will index in, and even if it doesn't make it all the way to the rear, it would still cause the brace to lock, thus you can use the weapon. However, if you consider full locking, that is, you get your full length of pull, and it locks in, and you're able to shoot, if you consider that reliability, then the reliability goes down. It's worth noting that because of this short length of pull, if you don't get a consistent lock to the rear, it will change your presentation angle and it will slow you down, for the lack of a better term. In a static environment, that is, all I'm doing is holding the gun and pressing the lever, mine was 100% reliable. My friends, however, started at 70%, sent it back to Flux, and now it's maybe up to 90% reliable. These are semi-arbitrary numbers for the record. We didn't count how many times it didn't fully lock to the rear. However, when you add externalities, other factors, you're doing drills, whatever, the reliability goes down even further. A big one for me that I had to learn was I typically hold handguns like this to keep my finger off the safety. However, if I have my finger on it like this, it will not cause deployment. This is 100% failure of deployment. So I had to stop doing that and I had to keep my finger more down here or just apply less pressure. There are other factors. So if you're pulling this out of a backpack with the hand or the pistol grip facing up and you impart a twisting motion like this, so we'll just demo that here, you'll cause a partial failure most of the time, even on this one. My friend's one is the one that deploys from a bag like this, was even less reliable on the brace deployment system, and he would end up on some of these rear brace deployment areas having a very short length of pull. It's also worth noting, I carried mine with a sling, and that's where this sling point becomes an issue. For a righty, this won't be an issue. If you have your sling on here, it will impart some counter forces and torquing onto the brace system. Thus, you will not get full deployment. Throughout the video, you've seen me, I do this jerking style motion, and that mostly fixes the issue. But at this point, you get it. The Flux Raider hates lefties, so I think that's about the last of the lefty issues. So go ahead, get it out of your system, call me a cripple in the comments. All right, moving on. This is a big thing, the optics, chassis, pistol interface. There's a lot of fear for myself personally when going into this review about accuracy, holding zero, and more. Chassis systems are notoriously bad at holding zero or even having a wandering zero. Why? Because we typically zero via the slide, and the slide consistently indexes with the barrel. Therefore, we're always zeroed. However, in a chassis system, we are aiming not via the slide, but we're aiming via the lower, and the lower will not consistently lock up with a standard pistol slide most of the time. It's just a matter of how much. Stuff like the Microroni and the Recover 2020 and more all have issues with this, where they basically have a wandering zero which blooms out their zero. However, I'm very impressed and pleased to say that the Flux Raider does it about as well as you can do it. We were seeing quite good groupings. With Federal HST, I was getting about 1.5 to 2 inch groups at 25 yards, which is very close to the mechanical accuracy of the P320 system. I've also disassembled it and moved the slide on and off, and there is slight zero shift, but it is very minute, and it could have just as easily been parallax issues, which I'll get into in a little bit. So all in all, very impressed with the lockup and how this system works together. Speaking of rigidity of the system, let's get into the chassis itself. It is extremely rigid. I have issues with other dedicated weapons, like say the TP9, where you can torque on the weapon and watch it flex under your arms, and that does induce a zero shift. For example, when I zero the TP9, I have to be very careful not to press too hard into the foregrip because it will cause the clamshell to press apart, causing a barrel optic misalignment. No such issues here. Speaking of which, the material on this thing. The material is, I have no idea what it is. If I had to guess, due to high thermal resistivity, abrasion resistance, and extreme mechanical properties, I would say this is maybe molded ultium or injection molded ultium with some black dye and then probably some fiberglass thrown in for further rigidity. Whatever the material ultimately ends up being, this stuff is stupidly strong, and it's actually quite hard to even induce any sort of flex. And this honestly outperforms some of the metal systems I've seen. Even the mag wells, which have a ton of mag reinsertions, have almost zero deformation or abrasion, and that is metal on plastic contact, which is not common with a lot of plastics. The front over here is also in the blast path of the muzzle, and you can see it's turned very black, but there is no melting or abrasion or whatever up here. Very impressive with the material choice here. I'm very curious what it actually ends up being. The brace itself has some flex, but nothing, some flex, but nothing terrible. To alleviate any concerns, this gun will not flex into position, right? So when you bring it up on target, it will not, flex into its final position when you apply pressure to the weapon as you break the shot, right? You need to pull a weapon into you. This will not move. So all of this is fine and dandy, but we have to talk about just the unquantifiables. How does this perform in practice? What is the overall experience? How does it feel to shoot? I shot this guy side by side with a handgun many times. Most of the round counts on this weapon was do a drill with the Flux a couple times, do a drill with the handgun a couple times, do a drill with the suppressed Flux a couple times, go back to the handgun, rinse and repeat. These are my thoughts. Deployment. The length of the pull is the first oddity that you're going to have to come to grips with when using a Flux Raider. No matter how much you train, going from off target, deploying the brace, and then indexing on target will always be semi-awkward to a degree. Yes, you can build muscle memory such that it's basically second nature. However, the short length of pull and the nature of this weapon going from a complete concealed position to a complete deployed position means you very often won't have that consistent indexing that you might be used to with a rifle. And because this is such a short length of pull and it's so close to your face, your margin of error is lower, or shall I say, errors are magnified, such that a slight positional indexing error will result in a large on-target indexing error. So you'll be slightly off, right? Once you're on the gun and you're properly on target, it's actually not as bad as you think with the short length of pull. Unless you're a freak of nature like Hop, then yeah, you're going to get annoyed. But this unity height length of the Optic actually does a lot to allow this to be far more shootable than contemporary options, which have very low-sitting optic designs. This is actually another low-key feature of why the Flux Raider is vastly superior to a lot of the other PDW designs. The combination of a high optic, a inline brace system, allow for a weapon that handles far better than its contemporaries. The trigger on the Flux, let's say it's a pistol-grade striker fire trigger. So if you just yonk it, you're going to induce misses like you do on your handgun. But it's not nearly as bad as a handgun because of the increased stability, 3 points of contact or more on this weapon. I put an Apex trigger eventually in, and it does bring it closer to a PCC or a rifle-style trigger, but ultimately, you can still tell it's a striker fire trigger, and you need to do your part. Recoil is about what you would expect. Functionally speaking, it's very similar to most direct blowback guns in how it feels. So if you shot one of those, it's very similar to this. Fast and snappy, short duration and recoil. It really only manifests as an issue, if we want to call it that, at about 25 yards, where if you're engaging with this versus guns that have dedicated recoil systems, the TP9, some of the PCCs, or even an AR15, seemingly it doesn't manifest much in time. It's only about maybe 0.2 seconds difference, but you will notice slightly slower follow-up shots with this due to the violent nature of the recoil versus a dedicated recoil system. Up closer and actually farther, there isn't as much of a difference because you're going to be waiting for those shots to settle at distance regardless of the recoil system, and up close you kind of just put the dot smear when it's recoiling on the target, much like you would with a handgun, and it kind of just gets the job done and you won't notice a difference in splits. In fact, because you can put something like an Apex trigger or even the regular P320 trigger is so much better than a lot of the other options, the Uzi and the TP9 come to mind, you can actually shoot this way faster up close. We're talking about 0.14 versus 0.2, 0.25, and it is easier to do with this over other options. All in all, compared to a handgun, the most concise way I can put it is the Flux actually operates at a very similar performance cap to a pistol, in the sense that a pistol can be just as fast, just as potentially accurate, and more. However, the big thing is that you need to work way less for that performance cap. When you pull out the Flux Raider, you are guaranteed a performance floor that is very close to probably your pistol performance cap. So if you're on a really good day with your handgun, you might be able to keep up with the Flux. However, if you have a bad day with a handgun, the Flux is still going to perform. And if you suck with pistol, well then the Flux Raider is just going to wipe the floor compared to your pistol abilities. Anecdotally, I went out shooting with some less experienced shooter. They could not hit a 20-yard small swinger with the handgun. I'm talking 5% accuracy or less. We gave him a Flux Raider, 90% accuracy right then and there. I started out semi-competitive to the handgun. But once I worked out some of the quirks of running a Flux Raider, I wasn't actually pulling in the brace to my shoulder, don't hurt me ATF, due to the short length of pull, and I stopped treating the trigger like a rifle trigger instead of actually working for it. It all clicked, and my ability with the Flux Raider just went through the roof, and my handgun couldn't really keep up, even on some of the best of days. Some slight considerations: rapid fire style, just smaller things. Night vision usage, yeah, it's pretty bad. You need a forward cantilever on this optic, and even then you're probably going to have to cant your head backwards, like a reverse head jut, because it's just so close to your face, and you're going to have issues with your optics smacking. For lasers, if you want to go like night vision laser route, you're going to basically be using a VIR2, a Surefire Vampire X400, or an Surefire XVL2. Of these options, the XVL2 is obviously the standout, but it's going to cost more than your Flux will cost, so welcome to the land of night vision. Enjoy your stay. $15 IPAs are served over there. The Apex trigger, pretty decent, I would say. It's a little pricey, but it removes a lot of the pre-travel. It makes long shots way easier when you're standing, but by no means is it mandatory. Under 15 yards, it's really not that much different, aside from maybe making your Grand Thumb mag dump montages a little more consistent, which, okay. Optic choices: don't run a pistol optic. So RMR, 509T, MPS, 507, whatever. Most of these have noticeable distortion around the edges, and it's very much exaggerated when this thing is touching your eyeball, and it is very close to your eyeball. The parallax is also dialed to 11 because this optic takes up so much of your visual horizon. It's kind of miserable. Does it work? Yeah. I shot this with a pistol optic for about 1,000 rounds, so it does work. But there's really no reason to seek those out. Stop overcomplicating it. Get a straight tube style optic, kind of like a T2 style, so a T2, Romeo, Halcyon, 4.3, whatever you want, and then call it a day. The trigger also tends to pinch you depending on how you hold it. If you hold it very high or very low, you will get pinched. If you wrap a lot of finger around it, you will also get pinched. I only personally noticed this when zeroing, but some people were seriously pissed off about this because they were always being pinched. And that about covers it and concludes my observations of the Flux Raider. Alright, I'm going to regret this. I'm going to do my opinions and the why and the if and the whatever, if you should buy one of these. I'm going to do it completely ad-lib. I don't know why I'm looking at the monitor. There's nothing on the monitor. It's just the ending of the script of the earlier part. Or the notes, I should say. But I think I have enough experience with this, and I've thought about this enough that I can do this kind of freehand, make it a little more organic. We'll see how it goes. This is an experiment, for the lack of a better term. Okay. Once again, one more time, I implore you, you should probably go watch the video where I talk about why and when and where a PDW like this, like the TP9, makes sense, and why they typically need to be in pistol calibers, and why size is so important. The TLDR, because some of you might not watch it, is PDWs are important because they're A, concealable, and B, they make you shoot more gooder than a handgun. That's really all it boils down to. But for some people, this doesn't sound like a big deal. I assure you, it's a pretty big deal. The question is it worth the trade-offs? And I recommend watching that video and deciding for yourself if it's worth the trade-off. If you buy into the PDW concept, it's not the same as a PCC, but if you buy into the PDW concept, what are my thoughts of the Flux Raider in closing? Without a doubt, compared to the current options on the market, and there are not that many of them, the Flux Raider is the best one with no questions asked. And I mean that literally. If there are quantifiers that you need in terms of performance, then there might be other options. But if there are no questions asked, you just need a PDW, the Flux Raider is the best option on the market. I've talked about why it's so good. It's got a functional ambi safety. It's got an excellent optic mounting interface. It's very nice and high. It's not squished down. It's very accurate. Most importantly, it's incredibly small compared to the other options. It carries like 50 rounds on board. I can't math. It carries 40 rounds on board with a very intuitive reload system. And most importantly, perhaps, it's quite cheap. Now, there are cheaper options on the market. Plenty of cheaper options on the market. But I'm going to go out there and say, most of them suck. Most of them aren't very good. Do they work? Yeah, they work. But they're not... The whole point is to get an easier to shoot system than a handgun. And if you compromise so much on that with cost savings, you'll end up with a scenario where you end up with something that doesn't really do it as much as it should, and you end up just, it ends up being kind of pointless. I think the Flux Raider is about as good as it gets. The only issue is the availability, and there's really nothing I can say on that factor. You either can get it one or you can't. You get unlucky and you don't get it when it drops, right? There's not much I can say there, but honestly, it is worth the wait, the trials, the pain in the assery of hovering on that website when a drop is going to hit. So, in short, the Flux Raider is my personal choice for a PDW weapon doing PDW things. Now, there are downsides. I've already gotten to some of them. The can is a big, major bummer because this thing is actually small enough that you can put a can on here and end up with a weapon that can be concealed with a suppressor. That's pretty fucking cool, right? And now I'm going to do tinkering with these guys to try to make them suppressor compatible. And as far as I can tell, if you're willing to tinker with it, willing to try different spring weights, yada, 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 you can get it to be very reliable with a can. I'm going to launch into one final negative with the Flux Raider and the direction I think the Flux Raider or derivative Flux Raiders need to go. There is one giant issue with this weapon, and it's going to sound like a positive, but stick with me here. The Flux Raider has a very sophisticated deployment system that took a lot of work to get to this state. The Flux Raider, to me, as it stands, was designed to be used with a holster. Why? It's got this very fancy, intuitive brace deployment system. And from a holster, you can go real fast. Right? That is pistol deployment times, right? And this allows the Flux Raider to, in theory, replace a handgun. Any other system on the market, the deployment time from a sling is too slow. It's just too slow. You need a handgun on you to solve instantaneous issues. Have a draw time under 1.5 seconds, deal with the problem, and then choose to use your PDW or not. Even with the Flux Raider, as you saw, my friend deploys it from a bag, I deploy it from a sling. Even then, I recommend carrying a handgun because the deployment time is simply too slow. However, the Flux Raider, in my eyes, was obviously designed to be used from a holster. And with usage from a holster, this replaces a handgun. And that's why all this effort with this fancy ass, punch you in the face deployment brace system was done. So you can compete with a pistol. Here's the zinger. There's no holster. Now, I've talked to the guy over at Flux, and he says the holster is a work in progress. However, it is not out yet. And that's an issue. Because without that holster, you have to treat this like a traditional PDW. Like the TP9, like a fucking Recover 2020, whatever. Take your pick. You have to treat it like a regular PDW, which means sling deployment, which means bag deployment, which means whatever deployment. And that is not fast enough to replace a handgun. If it's not fast enough to replace a handgun, a lot of the benefits of this thing go out the window. Because we don't need this quick deployment system anymore. And we can take that extra couple seconds or half second to do this. Right? We can take that time. Now, some people will rightfully say something along the lines of, well, you already have it. It's not a big deal that it's on here. And if it fails, you have that extra time to make sure it fully deploys. But here's the thing. This thing was not free. It cost development time, it cost monetary money, and it cost availability. This, I assure you, I don't know for a fact, but I assure you, is probably a big reason why this Flux Raider chassis system is having issues coming to market in meaningful numbers. It's not all of it, I'm pretty sure, but I'm pretty sure it's some of it. As you can probably see, the index point is right here. Not back here, but right here. This cost us about this much length of pull. That is not insignificant amounts of length of pull, and would actually do a lot to bring the length of pull on this weapon to a consistent area. If this Flux Raider had a folding stock or brace system, we would gain that much length of pull. That is a very, very big deal in the terms of usability of this weapon. The thing that people say time and time again when shooting this guy and this guy side by side is that this feels more natural. When you come up on target, it's exactly where you expect it to be. It handles like a rifle, or at least a PCC. This does not. Right? This handles like a chassis. I've put a lot of reps into it, and, you know, I can get it up on target, no problem whatsoever. Right? But it doesn't, there's that little bit back here that's missing to really make it feel right. So that's ultimately my biggest gripe with this thing. We have this excellent thing that makes it handle like a handgun alternative, but we're not quite there yet. We're missing that piece of the pie. We're missing that holster. Okay, you either get that point or you don't get that point. Let's get the brace in for the final closing shot. It's a good system. You should go get one if you can't get one. Thanks for watching. The usual YouTube bullshit. Comment, like, subscribe. Who cares, right? You either enjoyed this video or you didn't, and you can make choices for yourself, I guess. So, forget I mentioned it. Thanks for watching. If you are a subscribe star, you're a G. Thanks for being my sugar daddy, giving me money in this project to help make stuff like this a reality. Because, yes, the weapon costs a lot, and sometimes when I get it for free, that does bring down the cost. But driving out, shooting time and time and time again, the ammo, all that stuff, the motivation probably most of all, having people willing to give me money keeps me motivated and keeps me in the game of being able to produce stuff like this. Because YouTube is sure shit not paying the bills. So, thanks for watching. It's been fun. Come on, Nova. Come here. And then Nova says goodbye. Thanks for watching. Yeah, I know. Goodbye.